Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast with Zac Palmer, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that empower you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your health. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Now, today, I'm thrilled to welcome Andrew Stotz. Andrew is the host of My Worst Investment Ever podcast and owner of A Stotz Academy, proprietor of the Profit Bootcamp, which is a 12-month program designed to help mid-sized family business owners double profit through expert coaching. So let's dive in and take another step on your journey to perpetual growth. Andrew, welcome. I'm super excited to have you here with us today.
Zac, great to be here, and I'm happy to talk with your audience today.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, as my audience knows, I generally like to lead in with the same question, and where it goes from there, nobody knows. It all depends on what comes to mind next, and I'm ADD mind, so it'll be entertaining. With that said, if you would, I would love if you would share with our listeners just a little bit about your story history. Where did you start in business? What were some of the major turning points, life events, that would be the challenges or the successes that led you to where you are today? And what's allowed you to afford the success that you've experienced?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer that in as short a time as possible, but to make it simple, I studied finance at university in Los Angeles, and I went to work for Pepsi. And I worked as a management trainee. I was a young guy. I worked for 3 years there, and I love business and I like manufacturing very much, but I also wanted to live in Asia. So in 1992, I moved to Thailand. I had been working for 3 years. I really had no money, and I just had an MBA and my undergrad by this time. And I came to Thailand to teach finance. So that was 1992. And that means that I've been teaching finance basically since then and many other topics. But the first year I worked full time as a teacher in Thailand at university. And then after that, I became an analyst in the stock market. So I had a 20-year career as an analyst and a head of research, writing research on Thai companies, looking at companies from the outside. And the culmination of that was I was voted #1 analyst back in the day when I was active in that in Thailand. And I was president of CFA, Society of the Chartered Financial Analysts in Thailand. To continue that theme of finance, I completed a PhD at the age of 50 in China for finance. And so as far as growth is concerned, I think personal and professional growth I've been pushing for many years. Now, if we go back in time to 1995, my best friend from Ohio, where we originally grew up, came to see me and we said, let's start a coffee factory. So we started a coffee factory in 1995, and that coffee factory is 30 years old now. So while I was an analyst, I didn't have much fun. All my friends were going out and stuff, and every night I would go home and work on something related to either my teaching, because I continued teaching throughout all of my career, or related to my business. And so now I have, so I'll describe where I am, but that's kind of where I started. And anything you want to ask before I describe kind of where I am today?
No, I mean, I think one observation, and I think it's something that's easy to glance over for the younger listeners in the audience, is, you're going to sacrifice at some point in your life, and it's either earlier or later. And it depends on what you want those experiences and rewards to be. And I think for many entrepreneurs that got that itch and desire early on, it can feel like you're missing out on a lot. But the opportunities that you create subsequently down the road and the freedoms that you afford yourself, I think are, at least in my experience, exponentially greater and more valuable and more worthy, because it really comes back to, for at least to me, that one word being freedom. What I'm curious about, that's really interesting. I mean, from Pepsi to making a decision to move halfway across the world, which had to have been, somewhat intimidating. And this is coming from a guy that didn't leave the county he grew up in until 3 years ago. And I moved a few states away, which felt a bit intimidating. Now it's exciting, but nonetheless, moving halfway across the world, you start an education career and then a coffee company at the same time. Aside from, I feel like there's a little bit more depth to that story other than, hey, let's start a coffee company. Maybe it was that simple, but how does that evolve? Because one is I mean, obviously, there's a lot you can do with your numerical understanding. I mean, when
Yep.
you have a passion for financials and the story that the numbers are trying to teach us, there's a lot that people don't realize. Numbers are not just numbers, and there's a lot that we can do with that. But it's just a little bit more about how that evolved. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
So the first thing is that Dale and I were friends from high school. And
Hmm.
so we've known each other now for, many, many years, many decades. But in those days we were great friends and we had both lived in Los Angeles. He was working in a coffee business while I was working at Pepsi. So we were both in kind of the manufacturing distribution type of businesses. So we had some comfort and confidence in that area. Meanwhile, Dale was absolutely committed to running this business, which allowed me to continue my career as a financial analyst. And so I was able to contribute capital as much as we needed, as well as the expertise in the finance area and the accounting area. And so it just seemed natural. And when I was an analyst, one of the reasons why I was voted number one analyst and why I rose to the top of my profession was because the fund managers from around the world that were coming to Thailand or calling about what I should invest in Thailand, they knew that I wasn't just another kid crunching numbers in a spreadsheet. I had already had experience at Pepsi and understood manufacturing, and I understood management and the problems of management in large companies. But more importantly, they wanted to hear what was going on with the 50 employees that we had at the time or whatever it was, the challenges that we were facing. And then I could translate that into my research when I looked at meeting with CEOs of companies all throughout the stock market. I knew what was bullshit and what wasn't. When a CEO would tell me something, I was able to cut through that pretty quickly. So the truth is, it kind of integrated seamlessly. The only hard part was that it was just a lot of work. Like you said, sacrifice. I had learned about delaying gratification from the book, The Road Less Traveled. That was one of the lessons in it. And I had taken pride in delaying gratification. And so that was something that I understood very clearly the long-term payoffs would be, great. And they have been.
Hmm. Oh, that's fantastic. Um, it resonates with me. It reminds me of a book that has been a great guide to me. I'm curious if you know the author, Keith Cunningham. His title is The Road Less Stupid, which is
Yeah.
very provocative and engaging. And he's one of the only financial speakers that I've ever seen that is highly entertaining while able to educate simultaneously, which is a gift. I'm still curious about a couple of things that you said. So there's one thing that I want to know: are you a coffee drinker?
Definitely. And in fact,
Okay.
I haven't had my morning cup, so that's one of the reasons why I'm a little slow right now. But I usually try to delay it to let my body get started right. But I drink
Yeah.
about 3 to 4 cups a day.
Yeah. I try to be diplomatic in that same regard. Try to get water in my body first. If I tip into the other habit of leading with coffee, it's just never as wise. Exactly. Even better with a little lemon in it.
Yes.
One of the other things you said is, you alluded to the bullshit meter, and I'm curious about this from two different standpoints, both the analytical side, but also the um, I guess what I might say is more maybe some of the intrinsic values, like body language. Were you seeing both sides of these the big picture consciously? Was it just the numbers that were able to illustrate the story? Tell me a little bit more about how you were able to dissect when a CEO or executive was telling the truth versus presenting some potential falsehoods.
So to understand that, there's another dimension of my life that happened at a very young age, and that is I was put on Ritalin medicine when I was 7 years old. In other words, I was a hyperactive. I was just a kid that loved playing and running around and causing trouble.
Hmm.
And and by the time I was 10 years old, I was basically getting high most of the time. And by the time I was 17 years old, I had been using alcohol and drugs pretty aggressively until I ended up in drug rehab. And I did that, in the US when I was younger. And then the first drug rehab I went through, I came out and 4 days later I was getting high again. And then my parents sent me to another one that was about, 45 days. And then when I graduated from that one, they told me you need more help. And so they sent me to a long-term treatment center, which was 7 months that I stayed there. So basically my high school year, I was in drug rehab, in 3 different drug rehabs. That means that I went through a huge amount of individual therapy and group therapy. And in addition, after I graduated from that, when I was about 18, getting out of high school, I also started working in that area as kind of a technician. I didn't want to really study that. I was interested in other things, but I knew how to work with kids and that type of thing. And I got sober in September 15th, 1982, and I've never had a drink or a drug after that. And so it worked. But the main thing that I wanted to say to answer that question is that group therapy in those days, it was really great. I don't know anything about what it is today, but it was great because it forced you to look at a mirror and it forced you to be aware and self-aware. And when you were talking bullshit, the counselor or the other group members would say it. And so I think it really helped me become a facilitator. It helped me to see, help me to how do we de-escalate a situation, but also get down to the real heart of the issue. And so that is a skill that has carried me, all the way to this age. And I think in my Profit Bootcamp, one of the things that people say is, how are you so comfortable saying that you can help people double profits? And I'd say, ultimately, the solutions to our problems are not complex. They're just hard.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I know how to hold people's hands. I know how to get people talking, and I know how to keep them engaged until the problem is resolved.
That's beautiful. Well, first of all, thank you for your vulnerability and transparency. I'm a firm believer that vulnerability is actually a superpower, which is unconventional wisdom to most males today, but it truthfully is. And it's those trials, those tribulations, those challenges that oftentimes when we create the right story around them, become some of the most powerful turning points in our lives and can become very, very valuable resources. And it sounds like you turned what was a difficult time into a resource. And one thing I'd like to highlight is, anybody that is, I'm going to say, quote unquote, struggling with, be it attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity or anything on that spectrum, the simple reality is all of these diagnoses are not actual clinical medical conditions. They are a series of symptoms of which we compile and say, yeah, you fit within this category of this type of person, but it's not a disease in the conventional sense or something that's wrong with you. And what's really fascinating is if you study some of the most successful people in history, from presidents to the greatest executives and CEOs, the vast majority of which all have these same tendencies and patterns that revolve around ADD and ADHD and so on. And one of my favorite expressions is, it's like having a Ferrari engine, but with bicycle brakes. So when we can learn to upgrade the brakes and slow ourselves down, then what we actually are left with is a superpower. And it's not a learning disability, it's a strength. It's just the environment that conditions our belief around those things. So thank you for sharing, because I think that's something that's super valuable for the listeners, because they can see the opportunity instead of the potential prison that they may be creating for themselves.
And I would add, I would never give drugs to myself or to a kid for such a condition. I think it led to a lot of trouble for me, but I would never do that. And part of the reason is I was recently, I don't know, maybe it was 5 years ago, I was sitting down talking to somebody and she was telling me that she works with kids with ADHD. And I said, so how do you like that? What do you think? And just curious, because the job of an analyst is to ask questions ultimately, right?
Yeah.
And so she said, I just feel really sorry for these kids that they can't focus, and they're really, struggling and all that. And eventually I said, yeah, well, I was one of those kids. And I said, when I look at it, I was 1 out of 100, whatever, 3 out of 100 that was, couldn't listen to a boring teacher talk about something. And I thought to myself, and I said to her, to me, the 99 people that can sit and listen to a boring lecture and not have any reaction, they're the people that have a problem.
That is a brilliant look. I had never thought about it that way. I love that perspective. That's fascinating. And that resonates with me on a high level because I was 100% that kid. And what's so interesting about it too is that it did develop a set of beliefs, because when you're given these labels, what we're really creating is an identity for people to live up to. And at that stage, the mind is very impressionable. Yeah. So, I mean, we have the opportunity as parents, mentors, teachers to help paint a greater vision of who they are and what's possible, or, become the confines for who they will ultimately evolve into. So, that is something that's really important to be mindful of, is what we are telling our kids. Because I can think of two teachers. One was my PE teacher from middle school, and then an English teacher from high school, my sophomore year, who were the ones that found a way to get underneath my skin and saw something more in me than I saw in myself. And I performed better those years than I ever did any other year in school. And it was all because I had the desire to. And they kept putting me in these uncomfortable positions, but ones that was on the tipping point, on that precipice of what I didn't think I could do, but what my skill set could really manage, and just that perfect level of uncomfortability. And I can never thank them enough. Miss Malarkey, if you're listening, or Mr. Christie, you guys are gifts in my life. So thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. What I'm curious about next, and one thing I also want to touch on is just highlight, is the fact that most entrepreneurs, not always, some people just love business as a whole. But for me, like when I'm evaluating a consulting client, I'm always asking myself one of four questions initially. Am I a good fit for the client? Am I a good fit for the culture that they have or that they have the desire to build? Do I have the skill set or aptitude to really serve them at a high level? And then do I believe in the product or service? And that's why I was asking about the coffee, was because, I find that if it's something that we actually enjoy and are invested in, you're likely to step in with a different level of enthusiasm and interest than you may have otherwise. And I was curious which side of your brain it was going closer to. So thank you for sharing that. But I want to step back and go to what you mentioned earlier too. So we took the story up until today. Let's talk more about today. What is life like? Tell us more about the programs that you've created. How are you serving these mid-sized businesses? How did you land on that category? And you talked a little bit about it, is it's like, it comes down to clarifying that problem. And generally we've overcomplicated it, and it's difficult to see the forest of the trees when you're looking at your own business. So talk a bit more about today.
So to summarize what I do, I actually have a bunch of different things that I do. And one of the things obviously is continue to steward the coffee business. The second thing is I have an online course called the Valuation Masterclass Bootcamp. And I've run that 20 times online, and I have students from around the world. And I built an infrastructure of how to deliver a bootcamp experience, an intense experience that can lead to a true transformation. And so that was a beginning part where I started to see that we have some competitive advantage here in the ability to deliver the information and help people to make a transformation in their life. And that's so now I'll talk about the Profit Bootcamp. And really it goes back to our business. Coffee Works was hard in the beginning. We started in 1995. We were 27, 28 years old. We didn't know anything. And we were in a foreign country, so we're not going to have access to capital. We've got to preserve every single thing that we have and be very careful. And then the 1997 crisis hit, the Asian financial crisis. And basically our customers, we were only 2 years in business, so our customers almost disappeared. And then I lost my job as a banker, an investment banker. And the only solution at that time that we saw was to move into our factory. And so we lived on the outskirts of Bangkok. You could imagine a monsoon season, a very wet and steamy factory with only one room with air conditioning, basically, where we put 2 beds in there, and basically moved out the accounting team. And we bunked there to cause our business to survive and to conserve capital and the like. And the bottom of that was in 1998 when my sister called me in August, and it was a Sunday morning. I'll never forget it. It was raining heavily in Thailand, and just that smell of the monsoon rains, I can still smell that. Dale and I were up and we were just, had showered and just were sitting there talking. And, there's no place to go when you're living in this factory and it's a hot box. You basically have one room. And so we're sitting there on a Sunday. And my sister called and she said her cancer had returned and that she asked me to come home to see her. And when I hung up the phone, I just sobbed because I was, really, it was really a painful time, both professionally, but personally. And I got back to America and spent the final week of my sister's life with her. And then I came back to Thailand and, I was pretty depressed. It took time. We struggled with our business to get it going again. And then I finally got a job again as an investment banker in 1999. And then our business started to recover. So it was a hard start. So I always tell people in the startup phase, don't ask me. And I don't work with startups because it was too brutal. I don't want to relive that, And the fact is that the odds are so stacked against you. And, the only reason why we survive is because Dale has absolutely determination. And he proved himself through that time that no matter what, I would always back him, emotionally, physically, mentally, and financially in any possible way. And he's lived up to that. So that is the beginning of our company. It took many years, but by about 2015 or something, we were rocking. And it was all of his strengths and all of my strengths coming together, producing strong profit. But something happened. And what happened was our accounting manager started to slip. And we were growing at a pace where she wasn't able to keep up. Our accounting system wasn't able to keep up. We were trying to be forgiving and helping and, all that, but it just went down and down and down until by 2019, we had a 1% net profit margin coming from 10% previously. And we didn't have the finances in order. And we kind of made excuses for that. And then COVID hit and our revenue fell by about 50% on average. On the worst months, it was down 80%. We had 100 employees in this factory, and we had to figure out how to survive. We lost money during that time, and then I came out of it, and I thought, I've got to come up with a way to help my business really bulletproof itself and help make sure that we have guaranteed profits every single month, every single year. And that is where I started the Profit Bootcamp. It was what I created to teach, train, and push my own business to double profits in 12 months. And we doubled profits in 12 months after we came out of COVID, and then we doubled it again. And I think this year we're going to be able to double it again. And so really it came from my struggle and suffering. And now as Dale and I are approaching 60, it's not a game anymore. We can't, you can't lose, at the age of 60. You've got to make sure you're winning. And so a lot of my clients come to me because they are at the age of 45, 55, 60, and they're thinking, I got to get this right because I've got an exit or I've got a family members I want to take this over, and they don't like the business because it's not profitable. And so that's kind of the origin story of where the Profit Bootcamp came from.
That's an incredible story. I have more questions than I think we have time to answer, but there's also a couple of things I want to highlight. Don't you frequently find it to be true that when you're going through one of the most painful circumstances in your life, God, the universe, life reaches out and is like, actually, I got more? It's never just one thing. Maybe it's the rule of three. I think oftentimes it's a multitude of things that hit you all at once. And I know that, if the human in all of us at some point is going, I can't handle anymore. And that's usually when you get hit with something else. But it's that wherewithal, the determination, the willingness to lean into the uncertainty and discomfort that creates the successes that most people experience today. It's very rare that you meet a business owner that everything's been sunshine and rainbows with a pot of gold sitting at the end, and it's all fantastic, flawless, with no problems or challenges. If you're alive, you've got problems. The only people that don't have problems are in the graveyard. So we have to learn to transform the way we look at those things into gifts and opportunities and calls to action to change something about our present way of doing an environment. I love that you leaned into that. And I resonate with not really liking to do business with the startups as much, and it's more of a personal preference, and for the same reasons, because I was one. I took over a
I feel
family
your pain.
business. Yeah, took over a family business at 19 years old. I had no idea what I was doing, and it was way in the red. And I think about all the struggles that I went through over a 15-year period to build that thing up to what I did. I'm like, I just don't have a passion for that. I like taking a business that's already got consistent revenue and helping them to grow at scale. So I love where your mindset is at, and I
Yeah,
understand the
one
why behind
one
it.
thing I would say too is that I'm unbeatable when it
Mhm,
comes to hardship. And the
mhm,
reason why is because I can go back to when I was young, graduated from high school, no money. I had sobriety. I had a 12-step program, and I had some close friends like Dale and some others that were also going down that same path of getting clean. And I went to 12-step meetings, every night after work and all that. And then we would go out and talk. And the fact is, I was so happy. I was happy with my sobriety. I was happy emotionally that I had dealt with the problems of the past through my treatment experience and through my 12-step experience. And I was surrounded by mainly men, of course, at that time. You're just a young guy. I was surrounded by men who we cared about each other. We had no money. None of us had money. And I didn't have hope of money really at the time. I didn't have doubt that I wouldn't. I expected I would have money in the future, but I didn't. I didn't expect that I would have it then because I didn't have an education and I was working in a factory myself when I was 18. But the lesson that I always take to myself, and I always say, and it stood the test of time in 1997, is that I can be stripped of all my assets. I can be stripped of every single thing, and I still have myself, my friends, my family. And as long as I still have those things, I can recover and I can survive. And I don't need anything except love and affection and friendship and family connection. And so once I learned that, then I became much more fearless, not in a, a renegade sort of way, but just that I'm a very stable guy in my interactions with people. And it was because of that foundation. So I always tell people, ultimately, you've got to come to terms with your demons because it's those things that haunt us and those things that will hurt us and destroy us. It's not money, it's not business, it's not relationships, it's not all that. It's facing the demons that we have. And I faced mine. I was forced to face mine at a young age. I didn't do it by choice, but there was a benefit of that. And so I live without the wreckage of my past.
mhm. That is one of the most powerful and profound things that you've shared thus far. I think there is timeless wisdom in what you just said, and I know that I believe everything you just said to be completely true too. And if I had to try to simplify one aspect of it, I think a component is coming from a place of scarcity and lack to when we transition to a place of love and realizing that everything that we really need is already around us when it comes to the family and those close friendships and the knowledge, the wisdom, everything that you have through those life experiences. Then we transform to a place of love and abundance. And from there, we can build anything. But when we're stuck in scarcity or running away from the problems, and that's usually what we're doing with drugs and alcohol and other things that don't serve us, is trying to mask some area of our life that we don't like, love, or enjoy. When you make that transformation, that's when life really does begin to transform. And I love that you said that because it sounds to me like that is the true core and foundation to everything that you do. And then
Yeah.
all the knowledge and wisdom becomes the house you built on top of it. And I want to explore that house a little bit. Now, from an analyst standpoint, I mean, you've systemized this at this stage. So this is not like a guess and check, throw shit at the wall, see what works kind of a scenario. I mean, of course, there's going to be a certain degree of that in business. There always is. I mean, we have to split test and figure out what the clients, what the market demands, and clarify who it's for and the problem and so on. But talk a little bit about if a business is coming to you, what is there a perfect business industry or niche that you prefer to work within? I've heard manufacturing several times. Is that the
Mm.
predominant area that you focus on? Does this extend to multiple mid-sized businesses? And then where do you start in the line of questioning? One of the things I'm always passionate about is learning what are the questions that the best in the world ask? Because when we ask better questions, we get better answers. So, what are the questions that you lead with, and who are you traditionally focused on?
Well, I think that to answer that, let me just, I'm going to actually go through the questions that I ask,
Yeah,
and then
please.
so these are the questions. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned over the years is that I don't ever want to be a consultant. I'm not a consultant. It's not my objective to provide answers or do like that. I am a coach, an advisor, a counselor. I'm a guide ultimately. And that's what I do. And that's what I did in the valuation masterclass bootcamp is I developed a pathway and then I sell that pathway. And basically, if I look at the questions, I'm just going to go through the questions that I ask people. And basically, the first question is, are you a mid-sized business? And that to me, mid-size, I'm from Thailand, and so I work with Thai companies, but I work with companies around the world, and the program is online. So I say that's between $10 million a year and $500 million a year in revenue. So it's a pretty wide thing, but it can't be a startup. Second question I'll ask is it family owned and led? If it's just family owned and someone says, hey, can you go help fix my business? No, I'm not a CEO and I'm not here to fix your business. I'm a guide to help you fix your business. So they've got to be running the business. The third thing is they've got to have what I call a new obsession with profit. And in order to join the Profit Bootcamp, once they get down the line in the process of applying, they have to sign the owner and the management team have to sign a profit manifesto. And the profit manifesto is a one-page document that declares that doubling profit in the next 12 months is the number one objective. Some companies will get to the point where they're eligible, but then they say, well, we've got other objectives for the next 12 months. Great. Follow those. And when profit becomes that objective, come back. But let's say that somebody says, yes, we're willing to sign that and we really taking it seriously. Like profit will change everything if we could double it, right? The next thing is, do you have a leadership team? If you're a one-man show and you got all those things, I can't help you because part of what I'm doing is helping you strengthen your professionalize your leadership team. And so that's the next thing. So most people will say, yeah, I've got, 4 people around me that I think I would involve in it. Okay, great. So the next question after that is, do you have time? And I generally tell people, chances are you don't have time. And you're going to come to me and tell me I don't have time. And so I try to design my whole program to take about 6 hours a week. And 6 hours a week, 52 weeks, relentless pursuit of doubling profit. But if you can say, I've got time, I can take time out of this area or that area, or this is going to give me time in the future, as you said, like suffering now and fixing that. And then the next one, okay, now you've got time. The next question is, what's the level of profitability of your business? If your business is making a 20% net profit margin, you don't need me. And if your business is making losses for the last 5 years, I'm not a magician and I'm not a guy that's going to help you fix and turn around your business. That's a different type of consultant you need, which is a turnaround specialist. The best book on that is The 6-Month Fix by Gary Sutton. And if you find yourself in a disastrous situation for a few years, the 6-month fix can get you out of it. And once you're out of it, then come and see me. And finally, the last thing is that you need to have monthly financial statements. And I'm not talking about, hey, I got my sales numbers and stuff. I'm talking about a balance sheet and a P&L and a cash flow statement. If you don't have those, you really, truly don't know your profit. So how can we double your profit if we can't really measure it? Now you could say, well, yeah, but I look at my profit every year. I close the books then. Well, this program is a relentless cadence every single week, every single month. And I use my financial tools to benchmark your performance every single month. So we've got a feedback loop every single month about the actions that you're taking and how that, comes back. So those are the requirements that I look for. And so it's not, it's not for everybody. And I don't expect it. I didn't design it for everybody. Just like my valuation masterclass, I always tell my students, I'm not here to teach you 15 different ways to value a company. You can get that out of a textbook. I'm just going to teach you my way.
I love that. It's fascinating on so many levels. I mean, it sounds like you're very clear on who your ideal client is in that intake process, but you're also helping them become clear on their willingness to show up and execute. And I think that is one of the most important things that any coach or consultant or guide or what any leader in any context can do, is because you can't drag somebody across the finish line. It's like you can lead the horse to water, but we can't make them drink. And if somebody doesn't have the real, genuine desire to put in the effort, then there's no point in spinning our wheels. The question I always ask people, I mean, if they're like, "Oh, I don't have the time," I'm like, "Well, do you have the time not to?
Mm.
What are you going to do otherwise? Particularly if they're heading the wrong direction. If there's still time to course correct, fantastic. But yeah, and then a lot of owners, I'm sure you've seen this too, I think fall under the delusion that just because revenue is increasing, that profitability is. And one of the things that I'm hearing from you is this relentless financial analysis. It's not just looking back every 365 days and going, "Oh, here's how much money we had left at the end of the year." You're looking at a comprehensive picture and really analyzing month by month, maybe even more frequently, what is the story that our financials are trying to tell us. And when you have clarity, you have power, because when you
Yeah.
have clarity, you can make better decisions as to what to do next. One of
And
the
that,
questions, I'm just go ahead.
I was going to say, that comes from two things. First of all, having interviewed 800 people about their worst investment ever, I've heard every type of loss, and I understand risk management very well, because another part of my business, I manage about $100 million of Thai people's money they're investing around the world, and they're following my investment strategy. And what's critical in doing that is risk management. And so the point is, I understand it well. And the one lesson I always tell, so somebody says, "Andrew, I don't check off all of those things on that list, so I'm not really eligible right now." Well, I can still give you one piece of advice from interviewing 800 people about their losses, not only in the stock market, but in their businesses. And that is, there's only one thing that I would suggest that you do with your startup or your business, and that is get monthly financial statements on time and accurate. I dare you to do it.
Mhm.
90,
Learn how to read
95.
them.
Yeah. You don't even need to do that. Don't do that.
Okay.
That's putting too much, that's overwhelming, because
Okay.
you're going to tell me I don't understand finance. Da, 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 da. That's fine.
Mhm.
Just produce monthly financial statements. And I'm not talking about, a simple little thing. Ask your accountant. You don't have to do it. Ask your accountant, your outsourced accountant, your IT, your internal accountant, and say, "I want monthly financial statements." They say, "It's going to take time. It takes money, because we got to have more resources and all that." If you're trying to build a serious business, you must know your financials every single month. And then the second part of that is that many years ago, as a stock market analyst, I developed a scoring system of every stock in the world. I have 26,000 companies that I look at, and I developed something called world-class benchmarking scorecard. And that's where I look at any company relative to their global peers. I use this for investing purposes, but I also use this for managing the profitability of CoffeeWorks.
Mhm.
And I need to have the monthly data to understand how you're doing. And I can identify your weaknesses pretty quickly with this tool. But identifying the weaknesses is step one. The step two is making progress on those weaknesses every single month. And so that tool is something that I use, and I work with not only other weekly work that I do with people, but then at the end of every month, we go through the numbers as soon as they're produced.
Mhm. I, that's fascinating and brilliant advice. Thank you. Um, just as a quick curiosity, how long does it take you to analyze any company or portfolio from an investment standpoint? Um, and how much of the work is not just in the numbers?
Well, it's important to understand, as I tell my students at university, my finance students, I say finance adds no value. And what I try to explain to them is that the creation of value comes through our products and services. And those ultimately come through our ideas that we get about how we could better serve the market with a product or service. Never confuse finance with value creation.
Mhm.
And then once you understand that finance is a tool, just like human resources is a tool and the like, Then you can go to the next level, which I like to say finance is a mirror. And majority of people don't even look in the mirror. And even if they have a mirror, they don't go and look at it, but most of them don't even have it. So ultimately, the point is that I use finance as a tool to give feedback to the owner and the management team. And it's, what I like to say about finance is it's one of the last places in the world, in the stock market, as well as in this feedback mechanism in the economy, where truth really does win. Because if I have $1 million and I go into the stock market, or let's say you have $1 million, you go into the stock market and you have a really stupid idea. You didn't do any research on it. You read a couple things on the internet and you thought, oh, this is what I want to do. So you take $1 million and you put it all down on black, whatever
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
whatever that company is, company ABC.
Yeah.
And then the company goes bankrupt. Or, ultimately what's going to happen is that a professional like me is going to be on the other side of that trade and they're going to happily take your money. And then, so the truth prevails in the world of finance. But, you could be living a silly life without a lot of reasoning and skills in logic and reason, and you could do okay, but there's not that kind of margin for error in the world of finance. And so I like to use the cutting edge of finance, really, which is the financial statement, as the way to bring reality back. And ultimately, business and management leadership is prediction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make a prediction that if I spend $300,000 on Facebook ads, I'm going to get $1 million in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only way we ultimately truly know whether that was successful is by measuring it and getting the feedback of it. Otherwise, it uh, much of the academic literature that's done in the area of behavioral finance tells us that people cannot even properly remember the past. And even if they remember it, they put it into a different frame. Finance doesn't allow that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very, very insightful. I wholeheartedly agree too. I mean, the power of prediction and anticipation in business is I think oftentimes understated. I mean, we need to be able to know what's around the corner. And while we can never predict the future, we can gain insights based on what is happening in the national economy, the global economy, political environments. I mean, all these things can give little preludes to what may affect our the future of our financial investments and ultimately our businesses. Now, as we wrap up, Andrew, I have a question that I would love to ask that may shock you. It's not necessarily pertaining to finance and the business specifically, but I think it's a very I believe your answer will be a very strong testament to who you are and how you show up. So I think it's a perfect question
Okay,
to
I got my
conclude with.
answer. It's purple.
Perfect. So the question is, earlier you mentioned I am not a consultant. I'm a coach. I'm a guide. And I know what that means to me, but I would love to hear what that means to you because I think this will define what your relationship will look like with our listeners, clients, and anybody
Mhm.
that chooses to work with you here in the future.
So people, as I say, I help mid-sized family businesses double profits in 12 months, guaranteed. That means if you didn't double your profit in 12 months, I'm going to return 100% of your money. So in order to get there, just that statement pisses people off because they're like, I either need that right now or I think you're full of shit and you can't do that. So people ask me all the time, how are you so confident that you can double the profits of my business? And the answer to that is, I'm not going to double the profits of your business. You are. And the ultimate way that you are going to do that is number one, focusing on one thing, which is profit, having the feedback mechanisms, having a whole program and a cohort of other people that you're working with who are similar to you getting there, and driving your management team towards there. And so ultimately, I pride myself on teaching people things so that they never have to come back to me. And after 12 months with me, my goal is that, you never have to come back. You have one of the unique things in this is we create an online document called a business blueprint where all the things that I'm teaching, I'm putting into your business blueprint. Consider it like a toolbox, but it's, let's say, imagine a Google Doc. And so if I've talked about a particular subject that week, I put the basic summary on one page, and then I have lessons and activities that you've got to do below that. And then you have now a record of that. Then we discuss that in our weekly sessions, and everybody shares what they're doing and what their problems are. And then we move on to the next week. So it's a relentless focus, but ultimately you end up with a business blueprint that's a long document that says, this is how we operate this business. So when you hire a new CEO or a new head of VP of whatever, you can also put them through the same profit bootcamp and then help them. And then they'll go through and revise and improve that business blueprint, which is ultimately your business blueprint, not mine, but I help you create that. And that ultimately is the way that everybody says they're a coach these days. So I don't really like that concept too much, but I have to go back to it, is that ultimately, as a coach, I'm pushing you to perform at a higher level. And that's why I say I'm not a consultant. I don't provide the answer, but I am the coach that's going to kick your ass for 52 weeks in a kind, generous way that you're going to get there, and you're going to feel great when you're there.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And that's what I was hoping to hear and more. As cliche as it sounds, it's just the old adage. You take a man fishing, he eats for a day. You teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. So I love the entire value proposition and system that you brought together. So thank you for sharing with the audience. To our audience, thank you for spending the time with us today on the Perpetual Growth Podcast. A big shout out to Andrew Stotz for bringing so much value to today's conversation. Andrew, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about some of the products and services that we talked about today?
All you have to do is go on the internet and type in the Profit Bootcamp. Nobody has it except me. The website is theprofitbootcamp.com. And I've just started going out with my YouTube channel where I'm explaining a little bit about my story and other things there, which is called The Profit Bootcamp.
Perfect. So theprofitbootcamp.com, find the Profit Bootcamp on YouTube. And of course, we will have all the links in today's show notes. Now, if this episode sparked something for you, don't keep it to yourself. Be sure to share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review so we can help reach even more people on their growth journey. And remember, growth doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. We'll see you next time.